If you ask any horror game fan what their top 5 favorite games are, they're probably gonna mention at least one of the Resident Evil games. I mean, Resident Evil 1 through 4 shaped and pioneered the survival horror genre, and by all accounts have aged pretty well, all things considered. Personally, I think the tank controls and fixed camera angles, while iconic, are definitely dated and clunky by today's standards. So of course, it would make sense for Capcom to modernize their classic games, to reimagine and reinvent the experience while making some sweet moolah along the way. It's a momentous task remaking what most fans considered to be classic games, but let's go through the development stories behind the Resident Evil remakes, starting with what's often regarded as the best video game remake ever made. Resident Evil. The remake of Resident Evil was developed by Capcom Production Studio 4 and directed by Shinji Mikami, who designed and directed the original Resident Evil on the PlayStation 1. The game was part of an exclusivity deal between Capcom and Nintendo to bring previous and new Resident Evil titles to the GameCube. While Resident Evil 2, 3, and Code Veronica were all ported to the GameCube, Mikami decided to produce a remake of the original because he felt that the graphics had not aged well. And to be fair, compared to Code Veronica, Resident Evil 1 looks like someone's final project for their game design class. He also felt that the outdated graphics would make it hard for players to appreciate it. Programmer Yasuhiro Onpo also cited the original's poor localization as another reason for the remake. And I don't know what he's talking about. The localized dialogue is the best I've ever heard.
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right. Gary, thanks for saving my life.
Absolute perfection. Production started at the beginning of 2001 with an initial team of only 4 programmers. And since this was the first Resident Evil game developed for the GameCube, the development team had to study the GameCube's performance during the early stages of development. Initially, the team considered creating the environments with computer graphic animation, but then realized that this approach would require too much hardware capacity and processing power to achieve realistically. As a result, the graphical style of the remake features 3D models on top of pre-rendered backgrounds like the early Resident Evil games, which ironically makes it even more faithful to the original. But unlike the PS1 version though, the remake has way more dynamic camera angles that can track the player from way more places. Originally, the devs planned to upgrade the graphics and only tweak the gameplay, but as the game approached completion, Capcom started making more noticeable changes. For example, the inventory was expanded so that players could carry standard items like Jill's lockpick, while defensive items were introduced to make the game easier. They didn't make the game super easy though. One change that actually makes the game harder is the fact that zombies can come back to life once downed, as there's a random chance they can get back up. But the lighter mechanic was introduced to pair with this change. Players can use their lighter to burn the corpses of zombies in order to keep them from coming back to life, but it does have limited fuel that can be refilled in certain safe rooms. If players don't burn bodies, there is the chance that a zombie can come back to life as a Crimson Head. A new enemy added exclusively to the remake, Crimson Heads are faster, have more health, and do more damage than regular zombies, which encourages players to burn corpses with their limited lighter fluid. Another thing that is exclusive to the remake is the addition of the subplot of Lisa Trevor, which was cut from the original game. And it's always nice to see cut content be fully realized when a game gets remastered or remade. To make the characters look more realistic, Capcom auditioned actors to be used as references for the character designs. About 60% of the new character animations were animated using motion capture data, while the rest were animated from scratch. The voice acting was also redone along with all the cutscenes. Overall, development took 1 year and 2 months, and the final development was very intense with 2 straight months of crunch time with no days off to meet the deadlines. Resident Evil was released in March of 2002 in Japan, April of 2002 in North America, and September 2002 in Europe. This game set the bar for remakes, and up until recently, it sat head and shoulders above the other remakes. It only took the amazing remake of Dead Space coming out to give Resident Evil Remake a competitor. With the success of Resident Evil Remake, fans almost immediately called for other Resident Evil games to get the same treatment. Fans would eventually get their wish, over 20 years later. Alright, that's good. Now to record RE2 Remake.
Hey, you making a video about the Resident Evil remakes?
Yeah, actually, how did you know?
Fucking interesting, and I don't know. I guessed.
Uh, okay. Well, in that case, do you want to do the RE2 remake section?
What about RE3?
Sure. Less I have to talk about that glorified DLC, the better.
Damn right. Okay, yeah. Okay, I'll do it.
Sweet. Here's the KJ man, everybody.
Resident Evil 2 Remake is a great example of how to do a remake. I would go as far to say it's better than the original RE2, but its development story is kinda crazy. The story of Resident Evil 2 starts as Resident Evil 1.5, the beta version of Resident Evil 2. The team wanted to make a game that was better than the previous game, Resident Evil. So how about making a game that took place in a police station overrun with zombies? It was a great idea. So they started work and made what we dub Resident Evil 1.5. The question is, what happened to it? Well, it was at 70% completion when it was abandoned. The team wanted to make a quality game, and they felt like Resident Evil 1.5 was not that quality of a game. So they decided to start over from scratch. They did keep some things from 1.5 however, like the setting and Leon. With this redo of the project, it was decided that Resident Evil 2 would take a more Hollywood approach to its story. After a very rocky development, however, Resident Evil 2 made its debut on January 21st, 1998, and went on to become a massive hit. But where did the idea of a remake start? Well, the idea of a remake of Resident Evil 2 started as early as 2002, but director Shinji Mikami shot it down, explaining that a Resident Evil 2 remake would take time away from the development of Resident Evil 4, so it was canned. Years later, a group of fans started a remake of Resident Evil 2 by themselves. This fan remake of Resident Evil 2 was called Resident Evil 2 Reborn. However, this remake was cancelled due to Capcom asking them to stop development. Fun fact, the developers of Resident Evil 2 Reborn went on to develop a game called Dayman 1998. It was inspired by Resident Evil 2. Getting back to topic. In 2015, Capcom officially announced a remake of Resident Evil 2, and the hype began. The next time we saw the Resident Evil 2 remake was in 2018 for E3. 1 year later, on January 25th, 2019, the world of Raccoon City would be re-entered. The remake of RE2 is very different from the original RE2, for one major reason. You were in a third-person point of view instead of the fixed cameras of the original. You would think this change would make the game less terrifying, but somehow Capcom still found a way to make me piss myself. Don't get me wrong, however, fixed cameras are still very terrifying. The Resident Evil 1 remake is a perfect example of how fixed cameras can be used to make the player feel trapped. However, the downside of fixed cameras is the aiming. It's not great to say the least. Thankfully, Resident Evil 2 fixes that problem, via the fact it's in a third-person point of view. But just because you can aim better doesn't mean you have the resources to shoot. Item management has always been a big part of the Resident Evil experience, from the painful boxes of Resident Evil 1 to the boxes of Resident Evil Village. Item management and item storage is a must for any Resident Evil game. Nowhere is that more apparent than the Resident Evil 2 remake. Ammo is unlimited in this game. For the first few hours, you will be running past zombies to avoid using ammo. Your knife is not unbreakable, so you will have to use it for emergencies only. Green and red herbs are also limited as well. So manage your items well, or suffer the consequences. Also, safe rooms are your best friend. What makes the RE2 remake and the original so amazing is the way they've nailed that feeling of helplessness, with how defenseless you actually are. You can't kill every zombie you see. Hell, you can't kill most zombies you see. Your only option is to run. After running for what feels like forever, you see it. Your salvation. A place where you can be safe from the zombies. You open the door and hear this. You feel at ease. You are safe. For now. For the moment you walk out that door, you are no longer safe. The way both games make use of music and ambience to sell that claustrophobic and helpless feeling is amazing. It's why these games are remembered so fondly. But you can't forget the big man, Mr. X. The way Mr. X works in the Resident Evil 2 remake is different from the original. In the original, Mr. X didn't stalk you. He would break through walls and you would have to avoid him, and he didn't really stalk you. In the Resident Evil 2 remake, however, he's different, because Mr. X is more of a threat. Because he can and will stalk you. It doesn't matter where you are, X is gonna give it to you. The only place where X is not gonna give it to you is a safe room. Now you may ask, how does Mr. X know where you are? Well, it's simple, sound. If you kill a zombie, he can hear it, and he will come to that location. Now you can lose Mr. X, but the first time you make a mistake, X is gonna give it to you. William Birkin hasn't changed that much from the original. He's just more disgusting. In the RE2 remake, a post-launch free DLC was released, The Ghost Survivors. Like the 4th Survivor and Tofu Survivor modes, The Ghost Survivors is a minigame of sorts. But they are special for one big reason: they are not canon. The 4th Survivor, aka Hunk, is canon. Tofu Survivors is a joke, so it's not canon. But the Ghost Survivors are cool, because it's a what-if scenario. What if Chief Irons didn't kill the mayor's daughter? What if Kendall made it out of Raccoon City? What if one of the soldiers William Birkin attacked survived? What if the cop from the gas station never died? It's a cool alternative timeline type thing. Though it's kinda sad we haven't seen a mode like this since. The idea is amazing. The Resident Evil 2 remake was amazing, and Resident Evil fans wouldn't need to wait long for a sequel. For 1 year later, the Resident Evil 3 remake was released. But before we talk about the remake, we need to talk about the original. Resident Evil 3 Nemesis started off as a side game starring an unknown character as they tried to make it out of Raccoon City. At the same time, Capcom was developing the next game in the Resident Evil series. This game would have starred Hunk on a cruise ship attempting to bring back a sample of the G virus. The project was canned after the announcement of the PlayStation 2. Capcom wanted to release Resident Evil 3 on the PlayStation, so they promoted the Raccoon City Survival project to a mainline Resident Evil game. With the promotion, it was decided that Jill Valentine would be the main character of the game, and that Raccoon City would be destroyed by the end of the game. After a short development, Resident Evil 3 Nemesis was released on September 22, 1999, and became a fan favorite. The story of the Resident Evil 3 remake, however, is nothing special. It's a glorified DLC sold for $60. Well, it's $40 now. But still, the game took 3 years to make, and a lot of places from the original were cut. The reason for the removal was to tell a consistent story. The Resident Evil 3 remake would be released on April 3, 2020, and the feedback was not great. More on that later. The gameplay of the remake is the same as the RE2 remake, with one big difference: you can dodge. And yes, I know this was in the original too. The gunplay is the same as the RE2 remake, and that's about it. It's very easy too. The amount of ammo the game gives you is insane. I replayed it, and by the end of my playthrough, my box was filled with extra ammo. Hell, I killed every zombie I saw. Because the game would just give me more ammo. It's not like I would run out. And that's bad game design. The whole point of these games is that you have limited resources. It's not like Left 4 Dead or COD Zombies. But this game does not have limited resources. You can and will overstock. To make matters worse, the game is short. Like really short. You can beat it in 2 to 3 hours. And I mean fully beat. Like beat the whole main story. It's not like Resident Evil 2 Remake, where you have 4 different campaigns: Leon A, Leon B, and Claire A and Claire B. There's nothing to do after you beat the game. There's no 4th Survivor, no Ghost Survivors, and no Mercenaries. Which is bullshit, I may add. The game was rushed, and the extra content they added is a fucking Dead by Daylight clone. It's kinda sad too. The Resident Evil 3 remake had a lot of potential. Just imagine being able to explore Raccoon City at night, like exploring all these many locations that were shown in the original Resident Evil 3. But they dropped the ball. Thankfully, they learned from their mistakes. Because the Resident Evil 4 remake is amazing. but hopefully one day a fan project will come along and give us the Resident Evil 3 experience we actually wanted. On to you, Wildcard.
The original Resident Evil 4 was released for the GameCube in 2005. Development of Resident Evil 4 Remake supposedly started development all the way back in 2018, led by Studio M2. Development was brought in-house in early 2021, led by Division 1 team, with many staff from the team that worked on Resident Evil 2 Remake returning to work on Resident Evil 4 Remake. Producer Yoshiaki Hirabayashi said that he found the idea of remaking Resident Evil 4 challenging due to the popularity of the original. Kazunori Kadoi and Yasuhiro Anpo, who worked on the Resident Evil 2 remake, were selected as directors. Kadoi supervised gameplay elements, most notably how to use Leon's knife and its durability after encounters with enemies. Capcom actually minimized the use of QuickTime events in comparison to the original game, which I think is a good change. QTEs are kind of a product of their time that are pretty outdated by today's standards. The development team was split into 3 groups that worked on 3 main areas of the game: the village, the castle, and the island. The team also aimed to expand Ashley's characterization and relationship with Leon and make the story more horror-focused. The team modernized the gameplay to keep in line with more recent entries like Resident Evil Village and the other remakes. The original game used a laser sight on each weapon for aiming. This was replaced with a reticle in the remake, but Capcom still included the laser pointer as a weapon attachment that can be obtained pretty early on in the game from the merchant. The knife now has durability like in Resident Evil 2 Remake and can break. However, it can be repaired by the merchant and upgraded to have more durability and damage. Another new addition is the bolt thrower, a crossbow that can be used to take out enemies, and the bolts can be picked up and reused. It's great for when you're low on ammo. Unfortunately, I never used it because I like big guns. Additionally, the Ganados were reworked to be more dangerous, forcing players to use the environment against them, like shooting oil lanterns and explosive barrels or barricading windows and doors. The Ganados' signature move of the Plaga erupting from their bodies was also reworked to have a downed Ganado convulse on the ground instead of immediately erupting and getting back up. This change forces players to ignore other enemies and prioritize killing the downed Ganado, which can put them at risk. The knife can also be used for parrying incoming attacks. If timed perfectly, you can follow up with a melee attack. Hell, you can even parry Dr. Salvador's chainsaw insta-kill, which sounds silly and batshit crazy, but it is super satisfying to pull off. Now, we're gonna move on to what might be the second most important mechanic in the game: Ashley. Ashley has been completely reworked in Resident Evil 4 Remake for better and for worse. Capcom figured it would make more sense for her to remain with Leon, realistically speaking, since she would never want to be left alone in such a dangerous environment. While in the 2005 game, players could order her to either follow them, wait in place, or hide in dumpsters. However, in the remake, that's pretty much gone, as Ashley will always follow Leon, with the option to either switch between a tight formation where she stays close, and a loose formation where she kinda hangs back out of the way and avoids enemy attacks, and getting shot or blown up by Leon.
Ashley!
Some things never change. The hide command is still present in the remake and appears in a couple parts of the game where you can have her hide in lockers while you deal with enemies. Honestly, this works way better for me personally because now I don't have to worry where I left Ashley because she's always near me unless I tell her to hide in a locker. Enemies will still try to pick her up and carry her away, and if they get far enough away, it's an instant game over. You can make enemies drop her by either shooting them, which is risky because you could shoot Ashley. You could also run up to the enemy that has her and stab them with your knife when prompted, which was a lifesaver during my playthrough. Something that was completely removed was the ability to see Ashley's health and the ability to use healing items on her. Instead, if Ashley takes enough damage, she'll enter a vulnerable down state, and if she takes damage in that state, she'll instantly die. But you can help her up to keep her alive. Ashley can still be used to open locked doors and drop ladders, but the best change is that she can finally descend ladders on her own, and you don't have to catch her every single time now. Genius game design, it only took them 20 years. They even managed to make that room better while keeping the mechanics the same. And you know the room I'm talking about. The merchant also makes a return where you can buy new weapons, sell treasures, and upgrade weapons. The merchant also gives rewards for completing requests that can be found throughout the levels and completed. They range from fighting powerful enemies, to killing rats and snakes, to destroying all the blue medallions in an area. Completing these requests will have the merchant award you with Spinel, which can be traded for various items. Honestly, the only thing that even remotely bothered me was that the U8 fight was completely cut from the remake entirely, which is a little disappointing, cause that thing scared the hell out of me as a kid. It being omitted doesn't necessarily hurt the remake at all, since it actually helps with the pacing. Resident Evil 4 Remake is a perfect reimagining of a beloved classic, and not only modernized, but also kept what made the original work so well. All in all, the remakes have all been pretty solid, even if one of them was a little underwhelming and cut a lot of content. But hey, 3 out of 4 ain't bad, right? Everyone who worked on these games did an amazing job, and a lot of care was put into each of them. Most of them. Resident Evil 3 Remake may have been a bit of a misstep, but they more than made up for it with Resident Evil 4. I honestly hope they continue to remake older Resident Evil games like Code Veronica and the Outbreak games. Maybe Capcom will even remake games from their other franchises, like maybe a remake of Dino Crisis that people have been asking for like a decade. Maybe I'm asking for too much with that one, but hey, I can dream. If the post-credit scene of Resident Evil 4 Remake is anything to go by, then we may be getting a remake of Resident Evil 5 at some point in the future, which would be interesting to say the least. Like, are they going to keep it co-op? Is it still going to be set in Africa? How much are they going to change? Because Resident Evil 5 has probably aged the most poorly out of all the RE games. Anyway, let me know what your thoughts on these games are in the comments and what games you would like to see remade. Also, consider subscribing. I'm hoping to hit 1,000 subscribers this year so I can, I don't know, buy a cheeseburger or something. I'm the Wildcard, and as always, I'll see you next time. Peace.